When my son was 3, I bought a house in the middle of a forest. Dry, yellow, and dusty. It wasn't the kind of forest I liked. It had none of the cool gray mists or mossy explosions I'd grown up with. It wasn't even the type of house I liked. It swallowed sound and light, leaving only shadows and curtains of spiderwebs in the attic. But it was cheap and convenient, so whether I liked it or not, it was exactly what we needed. Jeremiah loved it, though, and I have to admit, I fell in love with the property the first time it rained. 4 acres of trees, scrubby wildflowers, and sage sent up the most intoxicating scent. It clung like fog. I stood on the porch, breathing that cool, perfumed air as watery sunlight shafted through the clouds, and thought, I really can live here. It looked like a fairy tale kingdom, so it's no wonder Jeremiah loved it. He was quietly, dreamily, and deeply imaginative. Where other kids ran around, narrating their adventures and fighting invisible foes, he'd sit wide-eyed and silent, smiling at things only he could see. His eyes, a stunning coppery brown, seemed bright and shining, like they were reflecting invisible golden lights. One autumn day, I got so caught up in the assignment that I worked right through lunch. By the time I checked the clock, it was already 4. Quiet or not, Jeremiah always pestered for food by 1. Swearing at myself, I quickly checked the living room. He wasn't there. Nor in his bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen, or any of the numerous spare rooms. My heart pounded so heavily I felt sick. I checked the house again, yelling, but he didn't answer. Fighting back panicked tears, I ran outside. To my surprise, that sagey, damp perfume swept over at me at once. At some point, it had begun to rain. I raced through the trees, feet crunching on waterlogged bracken as I passed bright rubber balls and muddy stuffed animals, and puddles filled with Hot Wheels that glinted like bizarre seashells. I saw no sign of Jeremiah. Panic rising to a fever pitch, I passed through the manicured path of yard and ventured into the woods. Halfway down a muddy slope, something caught my eye. Thin and dark and terribly big. It rattled weirdly. Everything inside and outside of me prickled, until I realized, with a great rush of relief, that it was a long, exceedingly crooked branch. And there, crouching in the hollow of the tree, Jeremiah! I yelled. He turned. Something was smeared all over his mouth, chunky and dark like raspberry jam. I marched over and dropped to my haunches. The tree smelled so heavily of wet sage and wildflowers that it made me lightheaded. You can't leave the house alone, I snapped. His eyes went wide and his hands twitched. Never, do you hear me? If you... Hungry, he said quietly. You come get Mommy when you're hungry. You don't come out here to eat. There's no food. Cookie, he said, and extended his hands. A pulpy mass of blood-caked fur and fine, glimmering bones rested in his palms. A long, fleshy tail dangled from between his fingers. I dragged him out of the hollow, screaming. He'd lost his grip on the dead rat, which dropped to the mud. Jeremiah tried to grab it, shrieking, My cookie! Mind a whirl with disgust and horror. I slapped him. For a terrible second, he looked shocked. Then he began to cry. My heart imploded and I swept him into my arms. The rain continued to fall, soft and somehow furtive as it drummed on the forest. My cookie, he whimpered. From my friend. I stared down at the rat, flat and wet and unmistakably chewed. I spun around and ran, fighting my gag reflex all the way back to the house. I immediately took Jeremiah to the doctor. I lied and said I'd found him in the garage eating a mouse. The doctor gave me a dark look, but didn't press it. My poor boy got so many shots and didn't cry once. About halfway home, I glanced at him in the rearview mirror and saw he was smiling. His coppery eyes glimmered with faint, breathtaking pinpricks of gold. He put his hand on the window and said, Look. What? I asked. City lights and the sea. He smiled at me, dark eyes shining. I gave up work for the day to keep an eye on him. He ate without complaint and sat patiently on the sofa while I streamed cartoons. His eyes were in focus, though, and more than once I caught him staring out the window with a sweet and distant smile. When I put him to bed, he was still fixated on the window. I followed his gaze and saw nothing but stars glimmering through tree branches. What are you looking at? I asked uneasily. Friend to visit, he answered happily. I want to go see. I slept in the living room that night, just to make sure he didn't sneak out. What I didn't bank on was something sneaking in. I woke with a gasp in the wee hours, heart pounding, wind moaning through the leaves, night insects sending up an echoing symphony. Then something small and bony darted across the living room floor. I screamed. A reedy, sonorous little shriek sounded in return, and that thing darted for the stairs, toward Jeremiah's room. I bolted after it, whimpering and whining, praying it was only a dream. Suddenly, the creature stopped and whipped around. I screamed again. Several spidery legs exploded from a chitinous torso. 3 poisonously green eyes glimmered from deep sockets in his thin face. It looked like a hybrid of a whip scorpion and a starving human baby. Then it skittered forward, its legs tapping on the wooden stairs, and disappeared. A second later, Jeremiah's door creaked open. "Hello?" "Jeremiah, no!" I burst into his room. The thing screeched at me, emerald eyes flashing, and charged at me. Without thinking, I stomped on it. Its back broke with a series of sharp, papery cracks, bearing a pile of glistening, frilled guts. I gagged and, only dimly aware of Jeremiah's frenzied screaming, threw up, narrowly missing the feebly stirring monster. "My friend!" Jeremiah screeched. "My friend from the sea!" He charged forward and pummeled me with his fists, landing sharp little blows that brought me to my knees. Then he turned and ran. I struggled to my feet and chased him out of the house and outside. The rubber balls and drowned stuffed animals and deep puddles filled with toy cars quickly gave way to slippery leaves and treacherous slopes. "She killed a friend," Jeremiah bawled. His heartbroken cry echoed through the trees. "She killed a friend." He turned sharply and veered down the slope to the hollow tree. I tried to sprint but stepped wrong, slipping on a sodden mass of leaves and tumbling to the ground. For a long moment, I couldn't move. Mud soaked my hair and seeped through my clothes. Jeremiah lost his balance and slid headfirst down the marshy hill, small and wraith-like in the dim. His head suddenly hit the tree with a crack I heard all the way up to the top of the slope. It was like someone had vaporized my insides and drew the steam out through my pores. I was collapsing. I was shriveling. I was a husk. And suddenly, I was on my feet, impervious to the electric agony in my sprained ankle as I raced down the hill, screaming at my son who lay crumpled and silent in the hollow of the tree. I slid to my knees beside him. Something sharp pricked through my pants. I looked down and saw the half-eaten rat smashed into the mud. The world spun. Starlight and shadow and tangled roots and shining puddles whirled together as I pulled my baby out of the tree. His little body sloshed in the rainwater. Mud flecked his skin, glimmering wet spots like dirty stars. Then I saw his head, dented and bloody, skin shredded into flaps in which wet leaves and pebbles and slimy clay already nested. His eye had split open, an asymmetrical bulge dribbling jelly onto his cheek. I screamed. Rain hissed and pattered to the earth. The wet forest glimmered. On my periphery, that great crooked branch juddered. Then it moved, flying at me, and slapped me across the face. Another branch joined it, and another, until there were 8 in all, thick and bony and coated in chitin, twice as tall as I, and all shoving me away. Sharp edges dug into my guts and cut my face, forcing me to retreat. Then they stabbed the earth around my son, gathering him up in a nightmare cradle, and dragged him into the hollow of the tree. I clambered to my feet and tried to follow, but the hollow was far too small and so terribly empty. Nothing but the splintered, bug-filled insides of a dying tree. Then a branch whipped out and struck me across the chest. I flew over the wet earth and belly-flopped at the foot of the slope. Stars rocketed through my head, followed quickly by a vision of a withered, monkeyish face with 3 green eyes. And I knew what to do. I ran up to the house, sliding in mud and gasping as pain radiated from 100 cuts and bruises. I began to sob. I went inside, fearing what I would find in Jeremiah's room. I'd seen its innards. I'd cracked it to pieces. It couldn't have survived. But the scorpion monkey wasn't in Jeremiah's room. In its place lay shards of its exoskeleton in a wet spot. My heart leapt to my throat, and for just an instant I almost gave up. I thought of its legs and its round, horrible little mouth and what it might do to me. The moment of cowardice quickly passed, and I continued to search. I finally found it under my bed, nestled in a pile of dirty clothes. Somehow, I knew why it had chosen my room. Entranced as I was by the smell of the rainy day sage, I'd sought a perfume that smelled similar. My clothes, my bed, my entire room smelled like sage and wildflowers. Of course, the poor thing had come here. Ironically, my room smelled like home. It smelled like a mother. It bit me when I tried to grab it, eyes flashing eerie green, so I told it, "Your mother sent me. I'm taking you back." It regarded me for a minute, mummy-like face contracting as if undergoing an internal struggle. Then it crawled, quivering into my hands. I knew why it shook. It half expected me to kill it. My heart lurched even as my most primal instincts begged me to hurl it against the wall. Multi-limbed and dry, scaly and scrabbly, it was a monstrosity, but my son had called in a friend. It had come to me even after I'd wounded it. Most importantly, it was a baby. I carried it outside. It shifted and cried as raindrops hit its broken body. Revulsion coursed through me, but I forced myself to hold it close, shielding it from the worst of the rain. I carried it down to the tree and set it inside the hollow. It turned to face me, eyes glinting cat-like green for an instant before blinking out of existence. After what felt like an eternity, the tree shuddered. Its tight cradle of branches expanded from the hollow and dripped open to reveal my son, whole and healed and sleeping. It set him gently on the ground. He jerked awake when the cold mud touched his skin. The first thing he saw was the tree. He smiled widely. When he finally noticed me, his smile dimmed substantially. I reached for him and froze. His eyes, wide and rich, russet brown, the precise shape and shade of his father's, had changed to a vibrant, eerie green. One of the branches nudged him towards me. He gave it a dour look, then stood and fit his small, familiar hand into mine. As I wept, he led me up to the house. I tried to give him back several times, which deeply offended the great spider in the tree. It pummeled me with its legs, cutting my skin to ribbons and bruising me to jelly, while Jeremiah's green-eyed replacement laughed. I finally gave up, when after slicing my face to pieces, one of the branches extended a small, soggy, asymmetrical object. I took it, grimacing at its softness. It looked broken and weirdly hollow. When I turned it over, I saw the clouded remains of a brown iris, and realized I was holding my son's ruptured eye. I never went back. I've thought about selling the house, but I don't think the replacement, the boy gifted by the tree, would cooperate. It's more than that, though. Sometimes at night, when the rain falls and the damp perfume of sage and pine and clay envelop the world, I hear my son's voice, a distant, dreamy refrain. "Take care of my friend this time." It's not fair. I gave her child back. I didn't snatch it away from her, but she still took mine. And though it breaks my heart, I think my son likes it better this way.